would you look at that? Nice brisk morning. What's up, everybody? Here to do a little tour. Gonna be a quick intro here because we got to get off this ferry. We're at Governor's Island today, the little 172-acre island, 800 yards off of Manhattan. Very historic little place. Eric, how are you doing?
Vibrating on this boat.
Yes, vibrating. I'm going to edit all this out in post, don't you worry. Yeah. But guys, check out the Patreon. That's a huge help. That's what funds these things. That's what helps keep these going. Big help. There's extras on there. Also, like and subscribe, baby. Come on, you're going to like this anyway. But guys, we got a lot of stuff to cover today, man. It's going to be a cool one. A little known island that's becoming more and more popular off Manhattan. Eric, what do you think what do you think about us not rambling anymore, or me particularly, and doing this thing?
I think it's a good idea, Tom.
I think you're right, baby. Let's do it. Okay, so Governor's Island actually has some of the earliest New York history possible because this island is where the actual initial settlement of New Amsterdam began. The Dutch settled here in 1624 before moving the whole thing over to Manhattan Island. Isn't that crazy? The whole city of New York could have started right here. And the skyscrapers would have been really big, right? Because it's a small island. Okay. Before the Dutch settled here, it was actually called Pagank Island. It's really, I'm sure I'm butchering that. It was the Lenape had settled here. It's called Nut Island. That's what it meant because there were different chestnut trees, all kinds of trees where they gathered the nuts from. And then it was called Noten Island by the Dutch because of that, to kind of commemorate that. But yeah, it was called Nut Island. I mean, if you ask, like, do you know where Nut Island is? It's like a question you'd ask in like middle school. You ask your friend, hey, do you know where Nut Island is? And he goes, no, and then you just like punch him in the balls, right? And that's something like, do you guys ever do stuff like that? Sure. Middle school?
This might be a Florida thing.
Yeah, that's what happens when you grow up in Florida. Anyways, in 1637, Wouter van Twiller, who was the Dutch West India Company director, actually bought this land from the Native Americans for 2 axe heads, a string of beads, and a bunch of nails. That's what he bought this for, which is kind of crazy. It's like, that's like going and buying like, 70 acres for, a phone charger and some NYU koozies or something, but he got away with it, and they actually took it away from him because he bought it for his own kind of collection, but then the city actually took it from him, 1637. Then in 1664, as we all know, the British took over New Amsterdam, which I've covered in past videos, but they took it over, and then in 1699, they named this Governor's Island because it was for use of Her Majesty's Governor, right? That's why it's called Governor's Island. Interesting. And in 1750, it was actually made part of New York County because that's when they gave all the names of the different counties of what is today New York City. So for example, you have Queens County, Queens, Kings County, Brooklyn, you have New York County, Richmond County, Staten Island, but that was all done under the British, hence the names, right? So that's where it kind of, and also this here behind me is the Governor's House, called the Governor's House because around here is where they believe the governor's actual house was. Interestingly enough, this is mislabeled. They say this is the actual governor's house, that it was built in early 1700s for the governor, but the actual trust of Governor's Island says that is incorrect. This was built in the early 1800s as a commanding officer's kind of headquarters, which we'll talk about in a second. It was a misnomer. I'm getting ahead of myself, but it's called the Governor's House. This is the oldest house on the island, 1813 actually. So that's still pretty cool, huh? Right, Eric?
Pretty cool, Tom.
We're right here next to Nolan Park. Let's keep moving. We still got a lot to cover. So that's the early history. So let's keep moving to the next part. So in 1775, hostilities began between the colonists and the British. Oh no, OMG. So in 1775, that's when the British said, you know what, Governor's Island is pretty cool, but we're gonna bail from New York because this doesn't look too good. So they withdrew, sent a lot of the people back to Canada, only to come back a little later. But things were very tense. Once the British leave, the Americans, soon-to-be Americans, kind of set up shop here a little bit to protect the harbor as well, right? They built a fort right here that eventually was replaced by this one. So just a spoiler alert, U.S. wins the War of Independence. Yay! 1783, the British are kicked out of New York because this was their home base during the War of Independence because they had booted out the Americans originally in 1776. Unfortunately, I've talked about that in many videos. You can watch the Brooklyn Heights video. Yeah, I talked about the Battle of Long Island / Battle of Brooklyn in that one. Anyways, this was where they had kind of a stronghold. So after the British are booted in 1783, the Americans come back here. And this fort, Fort J, is completed in 1794. It is then given the name Fort Columbus briefly, and then changed back to Fort J, because as you know, Columbus was canceled, I guess. Cancel Columbus, right? So they gave it the name Fort J, and it's still here. It's shaped like a little star, and this is one of the things that the island of Governor's Island was famous for being a fortification. Eventually 3 forts are built here, this one being the first. So this is the second fort that they built. This is Castle Williams. Like I was saying, they built Fort J initially here to fortify the island, and then they built Castle Williams in 1811 to further fortify the island because the War of 1812 was looming, baby. The British again, knocking at the doors of the United States. So they built this. They ended up building the South Battery as well as the 3rd fort on the island. But it was because of all these forts on this island defending the harbor of New York, they say that the British didn't really attack here in New York during the War of 1812, and it was spared because Washington, D.C. was not little aside. So this is what the actual island was kind of famous for. It was fortified. It was a base for the island to kind of protect itself during conflict. Look, we got a lot to cover, so we got to keep moving. And you can hear the waves. Very nice little view here of Manhattan too. You cannot get much better view here of the island than from Governor's Island. So, developers are frothing at the mouth here. I'll tell you that. But that's for later in the video. Let's keep it moving. The U.S. Army took over Governor's Island after they booted the British. 1783, they took it over in the late 1700s. They built Castle Williams, they updated Fort J, and then they started building places to live for the commanding officers. We already talked about the Governor's House, how it housed the commanding officers in the early 1800s, but then in 1843 they built this beaut. This is what was called the Admirals House, but also the commanding officer's house. The Admirals House by the Coast Guard, who then later inhabited this island. We'll talk about that in a second. Very beautiful building. Very nice. It was actually designed by Martin Thompson, who was actually the architect of the Arsenal over at Central Park, which we've talked about in the Central Park video. Check that one out. Very pretty. And this was built in 1843. So the U.S. Army kind of inhabits this throughout the 1800s up until also the Civil War, when they used this island as a POW, believe it or not. They used it as a POW camp as well, and recruitment center too, but POW, they put the POWs in Castle Williams, Fort J. They actually had, the commanding officers in barracks there, and they were able to move about the island, but the enlisted men were kind of holed up in much worse conditions, which kind of stinks. It goes to show that even in POW camps, there's a hierarchy of coolness. I'm sure a lot of the enlisted guys were just watching, their officers walk around being like, look at that, look at Officer Wellington, he thinks his bucket of don't stink, but that's what happens, I guess. But yeah, this is the commanding officer's house that was actually here on Nolan Park as well, just like the Governor's House, really throughout the 1800s. And so they built more colonels' homes over here to my right. That's the right, I guess, or my left, whatever. Anyways, whoo, baby, I'm rambling. It's the cold. That's my problem. Eric, should we just keep moving?
Let's go.
Let's go. All right, so after the Civil War, this area was further developed and made more of a military, I guess, headquarters. As you can see behind me, you have what's called Colonel's Row, all these little townhouses that were built, and more Army stays here all throughout the early 1900s. And actually continues to become a headquarters during World War I. Between the World Wars, more is developed, and over here, in fact, you have this whole huge building that was built and added on in the 1920s. There's a gym in there. At one point, thousands of people lived here. It continues during World War II and is actually headquarters for the First Army. And this is actually where they say the initial plans for D-Day. Huh? You guys know D-Day? Eric, you know what D-Day is?
I'm so excited about D-Day.
Well, D-Day is kind of a crazy military history event during World War II, where he basically stormed the beaches of Normandy. Dwight D. Eisenhower, actually one of the commanders, actually wrote a letter basically apologizing because he thought it was very possible that they would have failed. And he wrote this letter. It's actually in his presidential library. I'm sure he amended it after it went well and wrote OMG, NVM, LOL, ha 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 ha. But it's there. So anyways, after World War II, more of this area becomes developed. It becomes really a base for the military. But then in 1966, it's transferred to the U.S. Coast Guard. And the U.S. Coast Guard and their families are stationed here. It becomes the main Coast Guard headquarters, or one of them, here in the United States. And there's a hospital right over here. There was a bowling alley. There was a Burger King. What? There was also, different big events were taking place here as well throughout the 1980s. For example, Reagan met with Gorbachev here. Whoa! In 1986, they stationed the relighting of the Statue of Liberty to celebrate the centennial. 1886, huh? 1986. Pretty cool. You can watch my video on the Statue of Liberty if you don't know what I'm talking about. Okay. But yeah, a lot of stuff happened here because of its importance as a military outpost. The Coast Guard was actually here until the 1990s, when it took off in 1995, actually. So that was kind of its military heyday, if you will, as a base. A lot of the buildings still here, and most of them are abandoned. It's kind of weird to walk around here and they're all empty, and you're like, I would kill to have that much space. Yet it's sitting there rotting with, peeling off, and mice or whatever the hell. But
Squirrels love it.
a lot of squirrels, but just wish you could live in there and move all your stuff, Put up your Bob Marley poster, one made up of little Bob Marleys, and then your Scarface poster. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, Colonel's Row, pretty cool. All right, let's keep moving. Real quick aside here, I know this is kind of off the path of what we're talking about, but I wanted to tell you what this thing is real quick, because everyone's always asking, what is that thing? Especially when they're over in Manhattan. There are 53 fans in that thing, over 104, I think it's 104 motors, all of it for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. That's the tunnel that goes from Manhattan over to Red Hook in Brooklyn. It's the longest underwater vehicular tunnel in the country. Ooh, wow. In fact, the entrance is that big square thing over next to Battery Park that was in that movie Men in Black. It was like the headquarters, remember that?
I've never even heard of this tunnel. Is this a car thing?
It's a car thing.
Got it.
And that movie is starring that guy, Eric, that guy who slapped Chris Rock.
Tommy Lee Jones?
Tommy Lee Jones. He slapped Chris Rock at the Oscars. But it actually goes under here, pretty cool. And it was built in 1950, also called the Hugh Carey Tunnel. Thought I'd just throw that in, it's a little extra trivia. Now we got to get back to the rest of this walk. All right. So the 70 or so acres that Governor's Island started with aren't the ones that it's ended with today. I'm actually just south of of Division, which is kind of a little road there next to Liggett Hall, which is that little building there. And this whole area, it's about 103 acres total, was added on after, specifically starting in around the early 1900s in 1912 with the creation of the subway, the IRT up Lexington Ave. Oh, isn't that crazy? They excavated all that dirt, and you got to wonder, hey, what are you going to do with all that stuff? Well, they add on to the island of Manhattan, they add on to other islands, and Governor's Island was one of the ones that got some of that dirt. This is a common thing. I actually talked about this in the Battery Park City video. It's a good thing that someone takes care of you and explains the mystery of this augmentation of the islands of New York City. So you can watch it there. Also, you can watch the subway video. More on that. But yeah, you can see back there, that's Liggett Hall. We were just on the other side of that looking at Colonel's Row. But here we're on the South Island. There's areas like Hammock Grove. There are different hills. There's Slide Hill, where you can go down little slides. Hammock Grove, it sounds like a theme park, like over around the corner you got Tomorrowland, and over here you got the Briarwood Bears and Splash Mountain, I guess. On this other side, you have Buttermilk Channel. Buttermilk Channel is what divides Governor's Island from actually Brooklyn, from Red Hook, Brooklyn, that area. They call it Buttermilk Channel. There's two theories. One is that it's because when it was low tide, you could actually walk, before they dredged it in the early 1900s, farmers used to walk their cows, and cows would go across to graze and that stuff. The other theory is that farmers would get in boats and cross over here with milk that they had, and it was so choppy that the milk would turn to buttermilk. Both of those options, unfortunately, Eric, are not vegan. I know, sorry, man. And also keep in mind that after the Coast Guard left this area in the 1990s, in 2001, it was made a national park over on the original side. So today it's split between the U.S. National Park Service and New York City. So there's a kind of shared custody. And today, one of the big issues is they're trying to develop it. But to do that, they have to rezone a lot of it. And to rezone it, there's been kind of a fight. In fact, in the fall and winter of 2022, there was a debate as to what the original deed that the United States handed over to New York meant. Like they left it kind of in the care of New York, saying that you couldn't, it's always got to be for the benefit of the city and you know, maintaining the integrity, all those kinds of wordings. So people are arguing over what that means, and people are saying that based on that deed, you can't really develop it. But the people who want to develop it obviously are saying that you can. And just recently they said that development should be allowed, so we'll see what happens. I mean, hopefully this isn't covered in a bunch of glass box condos in a year or two, but you know, if a lot of the rest of New York is any indication, chances are it might be. But that's kind of one of the big debates going on right now, because as you can see, the views are incredible here. We're super close to both Brooklyn and Manhattan. This is very, very, very high value real estate, so that's something important to keep in mind here. And you may be thinking, hey Tom, development always benefits the general public. And if you think that, well, grow up. It's a little more nuanced than that. But it just recently was opened to be year-round. It was actually used to be seasonal. You used to be able to only take the ferry sometimes, but now it's year-round. So they have little festivals here, a jazz fest, poetry, all this kind of stuff in the summers. So right now it's kind of dead. It's cold, which is why people aren't here, because they're smarter than we are, but we're here to do the Lord's work. Right, Eric? Yeah. There's also a climate hub that's going to be developed here on the Buttermilk Channel side, where they're going to start studying climate change. And they're going to maybe use some of these buildings as dormitories for scientists and people getting trained. So a lot of plans in the works here on Governor's Island, which is kind of exciting and interesting and also scary. You know, I mean, the glamping thing is like they have a little glamping place here where you can glamp for about $350 a night for a little tent in the you know, in the summer. It's like, what am I, Kim Kardashian? You know, hey, I can't pay $350 to live in a tent. But you've missed the last ferry. You can just kind of stay underneath a bench or something here on Governor's Island. Not too many people walking around looking, but that's right. You save the big $4. You can spend that on one French fry. But yeah, pretty cool view here at Governor's Island. What do you say we head on over to the next spot? Wrap this thing up soon. Okay, so they're actually developing different ideas and concepts that they can try out on this island, you know, and this is one of them. This is actually the New York Harbor School. It's actually a high school that specializes in like the maritime. So they teach you how to oyster farm, they teach you how to sail, scuba dive, all these kinds of things, which is pretty cool. And if you're thinking, oh, that's a pretty niche kind of way of educating someone, it doesn't sound very practical, well then consider that in my high school, the main specialization was doing donuts in the Home Depot parking lot. You know, this is a little more practical than that at least. And that sounds really cool. I mean, you get to ride the ferry pretty much every day to school instead of riding the school bus. You know, so when you're walking up to your friend and giving him a wet willy, I don't know what you kids do, you're doing it on the ferry from Manhattan. It's kind of awesome, you know, pretty nice view. But yeah.
School was not nice to you, was it, Tom?
Well, you know, high school is an interesting time. Let's just leave it at that for most people. But this high school here has been here since, they use this building here since 2011, which is kind of interesting. So, you know, this is now a high school. I actually have a friend who goes to school here named Mickey, cool guy. It's weird that I have friends in high school, but, you know, I'm a mature guy, you know, what can I say? But yeah, this is the Harbor School, another pretty cool use for the island. But yeah, let's keep moving to the next thing. Oh, hello. Don't mind me just sitting here taking it all in. Well, there is a lot of history here. You know, I was telling you, it started with the Native Americans who called it Pagank Island and had, you know, became Nut Island under the Dutch. It was actually the first settlement before they headed over to Manhattan Island. And then the British take it over, they give it the name Governor's Island. Then after the Revolutionary War, it becomes kind of a fortification for the new United States. So much so that it becomes kind of a military base throughout the 1800s into the 1900s, when the Coast Guard takes over in the 1960s until the 1990s. And it was open to the public after it became a national park in 2001. It was open to the public in 2005, and now talks are to develop it. So hopefully they preserve a lot of it, because it is a very beautiful place. As you can see, the views are pretty awesome. You know, they got all these chairs everywhere. You can kind of relax and take her easy. You know, nice day. It's always a nice little trip here. year-round ferry service. Eric, what'd you think of that? That was pretty cool, right?
That was great.
Relaxing. We got to do some cool stuff, you know, get helicopters circling above us all day. I think it's just all the, you know, Goldman Sachs bankers going to work and coming, they forget stuff at home, go back, get it, come back to work. But yeah, this is a pretty cool view. Guys, if you enjoyed the video, please check out the Patreon. It's a huge help. That's how we fund these things. That's how, you know, that's how we grow, baby. Because I keep getting turned down for huge sponsorship deals with Goldman Sachs for some reason. But also too, like and subscribe to the video. That helps a lot. Help bump us in the analytics, baby. Also check out links in the description. Got a live show now in New York, once a month about New York. You know, talk about the history and all that stuff. So lots of stuff going on. I don't know, Eric. What do you think, man? Do we cover everything?
Yeah.
Should we go ice? Should we go ice skating?
I'm not sure if we're gonna be able to get out of this weird red chair.
Yeah, I'm kind of stuck here. My legs are numb. Actually, it's freezing. But we had ourselves a time, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I always appreciate it, making it this far. And I don't know. See y'all later.
I'm really looking forward to watching you try to get out of this video.
I will. Don't you worry about that. Watch me. Watch me. See y'all later, guys. Sick. Ugh.